have been exploring the value of interdependence. For a long time, Unitarian Universalists have acknowledged that we are part of an interdependent web of existence, and now we are exploring revising that language to include what that means for us covenantally, that we want to protect Earth and all beings from exploitation, and that we want to build relationships of mutuality, of repair, sustainable relationships that acknowledge that interdependent web. And so I invite you to hear these words from bell hooks. Much as I enjoy the popular New Age commentary on love, I am often struck by the dangerous narcissism fostered by a spiritual rhetoric that pays so much attention to individual self-improvement and so little to the practice of love within the context of community. Packaged as a commodity, spirituality becomes no different from an exercise program. While it may lead to the consumer feeling better about their life, its power to enhance our communion with ourselves and others in a sustained way is inhibited. So may we embrace our opportunity here to enhance our communion with ourselves and one another in a meaningful way as we join in worship together as community. We are going to sing together hymn number 218 in the gray hymnal, Who Can Say? But before we do that, I invite you to take a moment and greet those around you. If you see a face that you don't recognize, please make a special effort to let that person know they're welcome. Each week we take time to celebrate our joys and concerns as a community, and perhaps one of the great joys that we get to celebrate once in a while is a new bunch of folks who are joining our community. And so before we share our other joys and concerns, I want to invite our newest members forward so that we can welcome them and recognize them and celebrate their joining with us in community.
Kathleen. So welcome. My name's Carol Gay. I'm the chair of the membership committee, and here are 6 of the 8 of our most recent members. 2 of them couldn't come as of this morning. So Kathleen's got a poem to read, and I'll introduce.
What is this church? It is not the building, except for the extent that we have chosen it as our gathering place. It is not the minister, except to the extent that we have called them to inspire and guide our spiritual lives. It is not the music, except to the extent that we make it when we blend our voices together to produce sounds lovelier than any one of us could make alone. It is not even the beliefs, for we Unitarian Universalists have no single unifying belief, only the combined beliefs of each one of us. This church is the people. Without our committed members, this church would not exist. We are the church. Without us, it is nothing more than a dream. But with us, it can be anything we wish it to be.
Okay, so I'm going to briefly introduce our new members, hopefully briefly. At your right, far right, we have Suzanne and Jay Youngless. They initially checked out UUCC online, which is going to be a repeating theme. Suzanne says that it felt like a breath of fresh air when she first started coming to our services, and that this is the first church that she's ever been a part of that she reflects on the service the following week, during the week, and then she looks forward to coming back. So yay for this working for Suzanne. And Jay says he's been interested in world religion since his 20s. He's a lapsed Catholic and not even one of those that shows up on Christmas or Easter. Suzanne and Jay have 3 children, 1 in college, 1 in high school, and 1 in preschool. I knew I had to pause on that one. Time doesn't allow me to tell you everything they told me that you needed to know, so you're going to have to meet them yourselves. Okay. John Hepler was attracted to UU through his in-laws who first came to First Unitarian Church in the late 80s. He was married on the front steps of this building in June of 2020 when nobody was allowed inside. John's wife, Liz Cantor, started coming to First Unitarian as an infant and was involved through her school years and as a young adult. And even when she moved to Houston, she was a producer. Was that producer? Is that the word? Yeah, for Zoom In Live. Yeah, okay. She and John moved back to Cleveland last summer and are figuring out how they're getting involved this pass-through. April Leekart moved to Cleveland from Michigan 2 years ago, and she also started by watching our online services. And she's drawn to our liberal values. She's looking forward to getting involved in small groups and in some volunteering. And then Catherine Ziewitz started attending in the fall, and you'll find she's a ball of energy. She was drawn to UUCC and attracted to our emphasis on living out our principles. She also says she loves to be outside in nature, so if she's not here on a Sunday morning, it's because she's outside feeding her soul and body. So welcome to our new members.
Now, we do not ask you to renounce the devil, and we do not ask you to believe in certain things, but we do ask you to be intentional about the way that you engage in community, and we actually remind one another of that every time we welcome new people into our community. We have an opportunity to renew our covenant with one another as well. And so on one side, I don't know if it's the front side or the back side, but on one side of this blue insert, you will see the new member covenant. And so, we welcome you, our new members, into the UUCC community. We are so glad that you are here and have chosen this community of fellow seekers to travel with you on your life journeys. Will you accept our gifts of fellowship and service and engage with us as we seek to create a community and a world dedicated to love and justice? If so, you can say, we will. And congregation, will you welcome these new members with the warmth and comfort of your fellowship and seek to add your strengths and talents to the new gifts that they bring to us? If so, please say, we will. We will. Oh, I think they meant it. That's good. Let us all commit ourselves to this community with the following words that bind us together in common purpose and common love in the midst of our beautiful diversity of belief. Love is the spirit of this congregation, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Welcome. Thank you, Kathleen and Carol and all of our membership team that help people find their way into our community. Something that we can be grateful for, the new people that we add, and hopefully get to know well in the days ahead. We also place a stone of grief this morning for the loss of Elizabeth Fuller Simmons, who died peacefully at home in Louisiana last week. Our hearts and care are with Jean Simmons and Ava and all of their family. What other joys and concerns do you bring into this space, into this community? If you're joining us online today, then you can put any joys or concerns you'd like to share in the comments below the video. If you're here in person, I invite you to come forward and place a stone in the water for any joys or concerns you'd like to acknowledge this morning. stone of gratitude that we have a community where we can share our talents and passions with one another. I don't know if many of you knew this, but I've spent the last 3 days at a retreat focused on Joanna Macy's work that reconnects. And so I'm grateful for colleagues sharing in partnership with ministry, and also for all of the people that are helping to remind us of our interconnectedness with our natural world. And a stone for those joys and concerns shared online today. Thank you for entrusting them to this community of faith.
Well, good morning. I have today a box of tissues. It occurred to me today as I was thinking about a box of tissues, it's really kind of a rich symbol, because this box can mean that you are sick. It's a sign that you're really unwell and you're kind of like in bed and reposed. But on the other hand, it can also can be a sign that you're really upset and emotionally you're disturbed and you're sad and you're going through all that. That's a lot for a box full of very thin tissues to carry. And this is a symbol I was thinking of because I was thinking of, and maybe you all can help me out here, for those of us who are currently kids or have ever been kids, which I hope is many of us, what was the emotionally devastating moment in a movie or book or TV show or whatever it was, where a lovable and or possibly adorable sidekick or side character died? I see one in the back. You jumped right to mine. Amazing. Any others? Never-ending Story. Yes. Stranger Things. Okay. Any other formative experiences? Yes. Bambi's classic example, because that far into Bambi, you're like, I did not sign up for this. Yes. Steel Magnolias. Any others? Yeah. Little Women. Okay, good example. Absolutely. Yes. In terms of, absolutely. Titanic. Another good example. Yes. So, sorry, what was it? Brian's Song. We have some interesting kids in here. A lot of these aren't really I don't know if we were watching Brian's Song, how young we were, but yes. Love Story. True. I saw a couple more hands. Yes. There you go. Avengers Endgame. Yes. Yes. Inside Out. Bing Bong. Okay. So I'm glad to know. Oh, yes. One more. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. I'm sure we're thinking of the same loss. So I'm glad to know I'm not the only one who spent some part of my childhood cuddling with a box of tissues. We did name Artax before, that was just the one I was going to raise. If any of you haven't seen Neverending Story, it's rough. It's rough. There's a swamp of despair, there's a horse, it's a whole thing. Child psychologists have addressed this issue a lot, actually, because this is a really interesting thing. Children's literature in particular is especially full of experiences around death. And sometimes, especially adults who care for younger people are wondering why that always is the case, and why so much of this kind of literature is about death, and that these things would be overwhelming when we're too young. But of course, psychologists tell us this is actually an extremely important part about growing up. This is actually how we develop our own emotional sensibilities and confront some of these deep and challenging questions that really never go away in our lives. But thinking about that through the lens of our sense of interconnection and interconnectedness, it struck me how important this is for that part of ourselves as well. Because a thing that is interesting about all of this literature we've been talking about, every single example we could raise, is that it all invites us to identify with whoever in the story is going through that loss. And that is something that is just a little bit miraculous, that we're all invited to have the same experience of loss through a fiction that we all then collectively love. So it's like we all get to share and experience this, not as something that's only happening to me, but that I can then talk to you and say, oh my gosh, you had our text too? Oh my gosh, I was wrecked after that. Bing bong, that scene in Inside Out, oh my gosh, that was devastating. It brought me to the fact that one of the best things that we can do with a box of tissues is to share it, especially when we're all crying together. So the next time you find yourself watching something that requires one of these, I hope we take the moment to realize how big of a deal it is when we can cry together.
Thank you for normalizing crying as a very human thing to do. We need a bit of that too. A lot of us have been carrying a different kind of grief for the last several months regarding violence in Israel and Palestine, and I know different people's hearts are pulled in a lot of different directions. So we are splitting our offering plate today. We don't normally do this, but we are splitting our offering plate 50-50 between two different organizations. We focus a lot on the deaths, but there are living human beings that are suffering right now as a result of the violence. And so rather than choosing one organization, we are contributing to the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, and the Jewish Federation here in town has set up an Israel emergency campaign to provide direct aid for those who are suffering in Israel. We did this for a couple of reasons. One, we looked at some organizations like Doctors Without Borders, and even they are having trouble accessing all of the people who have needs. So we looked for organizations that were not facing those challenges. We also wanted to ensure that we were not giving the impression that any human life was more important or more valuable than another human life. And so if you give $1 today, 50 cents of it is going to go in one direction and 50 cents is going to go in another direction to these different organizations, and we're not going to have disparate amounts on different Sundays, and we're not going to have to worry about whether we value one human life over another. Our values suggest to us that every human life has inherent worthiness. And so by splitting our offering plate today, we are hopefully addressing that, and also addressing the grief and the care that we have for people that have extreme needs right now for care and safety. If you want to use Cash App today, you can use our handle $UUCC44122. Please do use the memo line to indicate today's date and our plate recipient, which you can abbreviate to just Israeli Palestinian Relief. And I invite you to give generously and within your means.
her book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, Frances Weller acknowledged our connection to one another, noting that psychotherapist Miriam Greenspan uses the term intervulnerability to describe the need for this mutually held space. When asked about this idea in an interview, she replied, "When I say we are intervulnerable, I mean we suffer together, whether consciously or unconsciously." Albert Einstein called the idea of a separate self an optical delusion of consciousness. Martin Luther King Jr. said that we are all connected in an inescapable web of mutuality. There's no way out, though we try to escape by armoring ourselves against pain and in the process diminishing our lives and our consciousness. Within our intervulnerability is our salvation, because awareness of the mutuality of suffering impels us to search for ways to heal the whole, rather than encase ourselves in a bubble of denial and impossible individualism. At this point in history, it seems that we will either destroy ourselves or find a way to build a sustainable life together.
It's a day for pop quizzes, I guess, because Alan asked about your sidekick death experiences. I'll ask the right question for a preacher to ask, a biblical question. What do you know about Moses? There might be Unitarian Universalists that only know secondhand that there was a person called Moses, but I'm not asking whether Moses was a real person or a fictional person, but there might be a few people who know a thing or two about Moses. What do you know about Moses? He was found floating. His mother put him out because she was afraid of his impending death because of a decree, and he was put out into the river and raised by royalty, who found him. Yeah. What do you know about Moses? The same thing. Yeah. Later on, he was in a position to help his mother's people. Yeah. He did receive the 10 Commandments on tablets twice, because he broke the first ones. Yes. He was angry. He led the Israelites for 40 years around the desert. Yeah. We know a lot of things about Moses. He had a stutter or a speech impediment. The Bible doesn't say that, but he certainly put up a lot of resistance when God said, go talk to the king of this land that has enslaved your people. He put up a little bit of resistance, and so we want to assume that that was because of a physical impediment and not just because he was scared to death of that. So, yes, maybe he had a speech impediment. Charlton Heston played him, yeah. Moses looks like Charlton Heston. Yeah. Yes, the people were worshiping a golden calf when he came down from the mountain, and he got so angry that he smashed the first set. That is why he did that. Yes. A burning bush told him to go back and lead the Israelites. So we'll get back to why he was out where the burning bush was in a second. Yeah. He moved the water. Yeah, he was responsible for getting the Israelites across the Red Sea, and The pursuing Egyptians drowned, yeah.
He got to see the promised land, but not to go.
He got to see the promised land, but he didn't get to set foot in it. Yeah, he was out in a wild place when he saw that burning bush, though. He was not right around the place where he grew up. And he was out there for a very specific reason. Does anybody know why Moses left the urban area where he was growing up in this life of privilege? Moses was a murderer. Do you remember that part of the story? Moses grew up a member of a marginalized population, but raised in a life of privilege. And one day, it doesn't say how old he was, but probably at that age where we all are young and full of vim and vigor and know how people should be, and he witnessed an Egyptian abusing an Israelite. And he lost it, and he murdered that Egyptian. And he thought he had gotten away with it because he thought that nobody was watching. And then he saw some Israelites that were arguing with each other, and he said, "Why are you treating each other this way?" And one of them said, "What are you going to do? You going to kill us like you did the Egyptian?" And he was scared, and so he ran. Because if he had gotten caught, that would have been the end of his life. So he ran. He went out into the wilderness where people didn't know him. He rescued some sheep and shepherds and got in with this guy that had a daughter and said, "Hey, you should marry my daughter." And so Moses got married and lived with this family that had nothing to do with the Egyptians and the Israelites and all of that. And then one day, God speaks to him through a burning bush and says, "All right, you're free. And there's a lot of other people that you left behind." Moses was free. Nobody was coming after him. There was not search parties trying to hunt him down. There were no wanted posters up where if anybody recognized him, they'd turn him in for a bounty. None of that stuff. He was free and clear. He had gotten away. Freedom. And God said, "You're not done." And Moses said, "Can I please be done?" I don't want to go back into that. I'm not the person to do that. Here's all the reasons why I'm not the person to do that. And maybe it's because he had a speech impediment. Maybe it's because he had a stutter. Or maybe he just didn't really want to do it. And God said, "Well, I'll send your brother to help you. But I'm talking to you." So Moses went back, and with his brother, he warned Pharaoh about the plagues. Pharaoh kept saying, "Yeah, you can take your people." They had this plan. We're going to take our people out. We can't do our religious ceremony here. That would be, anathema to a lot of different folks. And so we need to go out for a few days to do this religious ceremony. The plan being, we're probably not going to come back. And Pharaoh kept saying, "Yes, okay, go and do that thing," and then would turn back on his word. And so there were these plagues, plague after plague. And eventually, Pharaoh said, "Yes, go, please." And then changed his mind a little bit later and went chasing after them. And throughout all of that time, the life of the Israelites got worse and worse. Because Pharaoh was getting angrier and angrier about all of the things that were happening. And so he would do things like say, "You are still required to produce the same amount of bricks, but we are not giving you any more straw. One of the necessary ingredients for doing your job, we are not going to give you, but we're still going to expect you to do the same amount of work. And if you don't, you're going to get punished for it." And the Israelites were angry at Moses and said, "What are you doing?" Now, they got angry at Moses like over and over again. It's something that happens to leaders, but that's okay. You all know that because you're a bunch of leaders. But they got angry and said, "We had it okay. It wasn't great, but at least we had predictable lives. And what are you doing upsetting the balance?" And eventually, they wandered for 40 years in the desert. figuring out what liberation needed to be like for them. The liberation did not come easily. It was not a conversation where people just sat down and were reasonable people and said, yeah, you know, you're right. Let's just change the way that we're doing everything. There's a difference between freedom and liberation. Maybe some of us know what that difference is. But I also want to suggest that Moses was not just freeing the Israelites in that story. Because liberation was not just about the Israelites getting out of Egypt for their own well-being. There is something that happens to the human psyche when we create a system that dehumanizes other human beings. So there was a liberation for the Egyptians as well. A liberation maybe they didn't want and they didn't ask for, but there was a liberation there in upsetting that system. Not a freedom, but a liberation. Because we cannot be free while we are still chained to the awareness that other people are suffering, especially if we are benefiting from other people's suffering. The alternate title for this sermon or this service was going to be Those Who Walk Away from Omelas, which would have meant nothing to those of you who haven't read the little short story by Ursula Le Guin, but it's this amazing story about this very thing, that we cannot really have the paradise that we imagine ourselves living in if we know that there is suffering going on that benefits us. In this story, the ones who walk away from Omelas, there is this kind of utopia. Everything goes well for this city. Everything is perfect, ideal, just the way you would want it to be, and it's because there is a child somewhere in the city suffering grievously, endlessly. And everybody knows. That's part of the deal. You have to know that the suffering is happening in order to get the benefits. Here's what she writes. They all know it is there, all the people of Omelas. Some of them have come to see it. Others are content merely to know it's there. They all know that it has to be there. Some of them understand why, and some do not. But they all understand that their happiness, the beauty of their city, the tenderness of their friendships, the health of their children, the wisdom of their scholars, the skill of their makers, even the abundance of their harvest, and the kindly weathers of their skies depend wholly on this child's abominable misery. This is usually explained to children when they are between 8 and 12, whenever they seem capable of understanding. And most of those who come to see the child are young people, although often enough an adult comes back to see the child. No matter how well it has been explained to them, these young spectators are always shocked and sickened at the sight. They feel disgust, which they had thought themselves superior to. They feel anger, outrage, impotence, despite all the explanations. They would like to do something for the child, but there is nothing they can do. Because that's part of the deal. If the child receives care, if the child receives love, if the child receives what we would expect any human being to need, then the deal's broken. Every benefit that the society gets goes away. Now, this is a fictional scenario. This is a fictional construct. Things are not that stark in our lives, and they weren't that stark for the Egyptians, but in her story, the title of the story is Those Who Walk Away from Omelas. There are some people who see this suffering and walk away. They leave the city. It's not a great horde of people, and Ursula Le Guin doesn't say why they leave or what they're going to, but the author does say that they are walking away with purpose. They're not running away from something they don't like. They are walking to something. Maybe it's liberation. I wonder what it is like in the mind of an Egyptian at the time of Moses in that story to see the suffering of the Israelites, to understand that they are human beings at some level, and then to have a society that treats them inhumanely, and to know that your benefits as an Egyptian are built upon the suffering of other human beings? What mental gymnastics must I do in my head to make that okay? What suffering do I have to endure? What part of my humanity do I have to lock away to make that okay as an Egyptian in this story? And how much do I value the liberation when that situation changes? Maybe not a lot. I would lose a lot of comforts. The Israelites in the story of Exodus are kind of like that child in Omelas. According to the story, their suffering allowed the Egyptians to live well, and the Egyptians needed liberation too. And maybe so do we. I think a lot of times we like to identify with the heroes of the story. We don't identify with the sidekick who gets lost. We identify with the person who's grieving, with the hero of the story. And I imagine that when we read the story of Exodus, regardless of our particular heritage or our particular upbringing, I think we like to imagine ourselves as the Israelites who are finding freedom, liberation, not just freedom, but liberation. We don't often imagine ourselves as the Egyptians in the story. And maybe some of us don't need to. Maybe some of us don't want to, and that's fine. But if there is a reason to identify with the Egyptians in the story, maybe we can come to awareness that for ourselves, it does something to our minds, to our psyches, our spirits, however you want to phrase it, whatever that looks like in your theology, it does something to the human soul to know that our comfort or happiness or health comes at someone else's expense. And maybe some people today revel in that and pretend that it makes us better than other people. Receiving good things at someone else's expense, we have such a competitive spirit in our society. We might feel like we've won something. Somebody else has lost and we have won and we feel good about it. Maybe that's not the case for a lot of people in this room. But man, do we see it on social media. And man, do we see it on television. It's tough to bear witness to. But liberation that is only for some people is an illusion. Liberation that is just for the Israelites is an illusion. The Egyptians have to be liberated as well from their way of thinking in order for that whole thing to work. If all are not liberated, then none are liberated. That's Marsha P. Johnson. Liberation for some is not true liberation. And maybe we just use the word freedom wrong. Maybe there's not really intended to be a differentiation between personal freedom and liberation, but I think a lot of times we use personal freedom as a substitute for the hard work of liberation. I am free to do what I want, and no one can tell me what to do, and I don't have to worry about the consequences in other people's lives. This is a lot of American spirit, I think, right now, maybe for a long time. But it would seem that a focus on individual freedom falls short of our calling, and it falls short of our value of interdependence that has been with us as Unitarian Universalists for a long time. The celebration of Passover with our Jewish siblings and some people in this room is about that awareness that when all of the plagues were happening in Egypt, that God passed over the Israelites. When the firstborn, when things got so bad, when things escalated to the point that God said, the firstborn of your Egyptian families are going to die. God provided a way for the Israelites to avoid that suffering. He passed over their houses because they took action to identify themselves as people of faith. They had to do something. They had to show something on their door frames. The angel of death passed over and recognized and said, you have demonstrated, you have shown the outward sign that God has made a promise to you. And so I wonder what it would look like for us to make an outward sign that we value interdependence, that we value liberation. It's not blood on a lintel, but maybe there's an outward sign that we make as Unitarian Universalists that says we know that we are part of an interdependent web, and we know what it is to commit to protecting and safeguarding Earth and all beings from exploitation. I don't know what that outward sign is, but I hope we explore that together. Maybe it is as simple as walking away from Omelas, but even that takes a lot of courage. May we have that courage in our hearts, and may we understand that we walk together as a community of faith. Amen, and blessed be. We are going to sing, but I didn't write down the number, so I'm going over here to look at what it is. Number 151, I Wish I Knew How. It is in the gray hymnal. I invite you to rise, embody your spirit as we raise our voices together. I Wish I Knew How, number 151. I'm glad we gave you the opportunity to accompany us on that song. I want to let you know about a couple of things coming up. First of all, if you are going to be participating in the multi-generational RE experience today, Alan has asked that you gather in room 106, right? And I think we have all of the participants that we are counting on for that, but if you had talked to Alan or Helen ahead of time and said, maybe I can, go ahead to room 106, and hopefully there will be space for you, but it's one of those things they prepared ahead of time, so you might have missed out, but there'll be another opportunity. Here's another thing not to miss out on. Tuesday, May 7th, Greater Cleveland Congregations is hosting a county-wide action at Olivet Institutional Baptist Church at 7 p.m. on the topic of pretrial justice. They've got some excellent speakers lined up, and it's an opportunity to be inspired and educated, and even if you feel like You already know all you need to know about pretrial justice. This is one of those things where it matters that people show up in numbers. And so right now, we've got about half of the people that we've committed to take to this event, and we want to be able to reach our full goal. So talk to our GCC core members today downstairs in the fellowship hall. I think they're setting up carpools, so if transportation is a concern for you, then you'll get in a carpool list so that you can travel to that event together with other Unitarian Universalists that care about bringing greater justice to Cuyahoga County. Lots of other stuff happening. Please do check your newsletter for all of the things that are going on in our congregation. May we celebrate the freedom that we experience. And may we respond to our own sense of calling to continue working for true and full liberation. May we recognize that we are capable of holding all of this, to be festive and celebrate, to stand before our own burning bushes, to heed the calling placed on our lives and the support that accompanies that calling, and to respond by moving toward liberation. Amen, and blessed be.
It's time to end our service today by extinguishing the chalice. You'll find extinguishing the chalice on the yellow card in the pew in front of you, and you're invited to read these words with me now. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together